So how's life? How are you? Intense, I can imagine. What a world.
What a world.
Speculation versus participation. I think the title pretty much ties it up. Basically, these meetings are, yes, to touch about a theme, share resources as well, stimulate each other.
Thank you, Felix, for organizing these Sunday afternoon events. I always look forward to them. Thank you very much for inviting me along. It's great to be here and to share ideas. And just to kind of explain where my background is, I initially studied economics. And then I ended up working in banking and finance, investment banks. And then I had a bit of a crisis of conscience. I left banking and I decided I wanted to work in the arts. So I ended up going to London, and that's where I met Felix, and we worked together. And now I'm living in the southwest of France in Bordeaux. I lecture in international trade, in finance. I do a lot of communication work with students as well, which is kind of bringing my theater background as well. So I kind of combine the two, especially for business students. They need to learn how to communicate better, very much so.
I must say, first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's, I'm not used to this kind of talks, and I'm a very shy person, so I'll try to do my best to speak out. I'm from Switzerland. I grew up in Lugano, was born in Sarajevo. I'm a mixed background in economics and finance as well. Experience in banking and reinsurance, mostly as a risk analyst, and working in projects as a business analyst. Yeah, before that I was also a basketball player, so I had some small experience in basketball. I'm coming from different aspects of life. Last year, I've quit my job. I was working for UBS to find something else, and recently, 6 months ago, I found crypto NFTs, and I've been building a NFT collection myself, and opened a company, hopefully trying to work along the Web3 world.
Yeah, I started as a computer, informatics first, and work in the web industry. And then I followed that by study at the university in international relations, and then in tech governance. And during that time, I see a lot about, I will say, how the social side of blockchain, and how sometimes we use a narrative in the future to create some policy in the future.
It seems like a funny, weird overlap here. Felix, thank you for having me. I know Felix and Kevin when they came to Perdrisat in Tuscany to help film the virtual reality aspects of a film that I've been working on for 20 years called Absurdity of Certainty. And it gives some perspective on the Western worldview, how we became so binary and polarized in our thinking. I would like to say blaming like Descartes and Newtonian clockwork and things like that, and arguing that the advances of the 1900s should push us out of these limited boxes. But at the same time, I sort of self-identify as a fool comedian, and was definitely a bad waitress in college, which is why I also sell financial technology.
There's richness around each other. So let me set it up briefly and then go right into it. Participation versus speculation. On the one hand, I think we're moving out of a sort of initial relationship with technology, with virtual landscapes, with internet. I mean, it's somehow we've been at it for decades now. So at this point, and through the last 2-3 years that we've lived, evidently things moved forward in time. We want to talk about time somehow. There's a sort of opening or branching of ideas and the way we're dealing with these instruments and technology somehow. On the one side, there's speculation, which is usually tied to financial instruments and the way we relate to the internet or virtual landscapes or even blockchains or different technologies and technical elements, AI, which is reaching out from the mirror of the digital world more often into actually giving it tentacles to the actual material world right now. So it really is a connection, or it's also projecting of the self of humanity towards this virtual landscape. So speculation tends, on the one hand, to concentrate resources. It tends to also generate a sort of constrictive scenario where there's, a reduced amount of possibilities for a reduced amount of people, or a reduced amount of corporations, or a reduced amount of players. Whereas on the other hand, there's also this aspect of opening towards communities, opening towards open source circumstances, opening towards propagation of information, sharing of knowledge, sharing of ideas. And these two are kind of growing in a way, in a parallel way, and there's elements that are attaching the two sides. There's a lot of details on how we're going to approach these two elements, and I think it's pretty vast. So an hour is not going to really tie it all together, but just allowing ourselves to perhaps go through a personal prism into what this is about. How do we all feel about this? Understanding how this also creates novelty, the complexification of life through the virtual landscape, digital instruments, and how this is also allowing us to change somehow the way we think about reality, the way we relate to each other, and the unification of cosmovisions in the world somehow. Nema, you recently launched your first NFT. I'm sure you made a number of decisions. You've created your project, you've shared it, you've set up things in motion, you've kind of, you've projected yourself on how you want to do it. Of course, there's a number of possibilities of how you can do this, no? So perhaps what was it that kind of propelled you to do this? And then what were the decisions and the expectations on the way? And how is it that you're living it right now? Because you're in the midst of launching it, right? No?
Yeah, I'm launching in 1 week, basically. And as I said before, I was working in the last 6 months. It's been an adventure, and at the beginning I didn't know where I was heading to, but I had always the dream on my mind to be an entrepreneur, and I found that like the Web3 crypto world allows you to experiment, and at the same time, so since I'm launching an NFT art collection, I mean, if that can be called art, I'm not sure. I wanted to express my own art, which was something I was always hiding from everyone. I was silently drawing digitally, and I found that actually, all those connection points were a perfect fit of what the NFT world can offer you, what crypto can offer you. So I just said, let's experiment. While I was like drawing, experimenting, writing a story of my NFT, many other doors has opened, and now I'm here soon launching. I'm not expecting like a huge return, but like for me, it's sort of a revenge. Even if I not make much money out of it, I'm kind of happy to have kind of learned the technology, got in touch with the community, and simply enjoyed my time expressing my art.
Tell us about the community. What is it that you, I mean, how does that participate in the fact, I mean, from the one hand, you've got this way of, of course, it's also about making money. There's also about value, currency in the sense of, trying to get, but what is it about, I mean, this, when you talk about community, creating a community, understanding, how does this add value to your relationship with your NFT, to your work, to your art? Let's call it art, right?
Yeah, let's call it art. Community is a big important part, and I've realized only later. Actually, I wanted to build community from the beginning because my background was more banking, investments, finance. I only recently realized that when I was finishing up my own collection, I was doing my marketing, and realized that actually it's very easy to build a short-term project and simply sell out and grab the money and go, but it's much harder to build a community, and that's where I kind of struggled with in the last couple of weeks, and I realized, I think community must be kind of built genuinely. You have to participate. You have to kind of, go into certain chats, certain forums, speak about your problems or opportunities, and be open to, which is difficult because The other topic here is speculation, and there is lots of hype and speculation and lots of money around, and lots of scams, lots of frauds. Again, so it's kind of hard to navigate this landscape.
It's hard to be pure in the essence of things. And I think, is it about sharing a vision, creating a community?
It is sharing a vision, definitely. It is, especially in the Web3, the vision that, I think crypto people want to share is decentralization and openness and transparency. I think that's what drives most of the community.
Social and political implications of technology, dealing with technology as an emancipatory force, key through multidisciplinary approach to technology. How does this relate? It needs to relate with other environments, the creative environments. What are your conclusions today, and where is it going? Let's turn it around. Conor, you've been concerned about surveillance.
I was just thinking quite a bit when you talked about speculation versus participation, and I was involved in a project in London when I moved there. Well, it was a charity. I was kind of hanging out with a bunch of economists, and I might have mentioned this the last time as well. And I lived in Brixton at the time, and my flatmate at the time was working for an organization called the New Economics Foundation, NEF, which is a non-profit think tank. And he was an economist, and he's an economist now with the London School of Economics. And we were talking about establishing an independent currency. So when we talk about currency, certainly like NFTs or crypto, that's on a scale of speculation. So when you talked about participation versus speculation, we established basically the Brixton pound, which is an independent currency in London. And that was all about community. And that was a real currency in London. So in London has an independent currency called the Brixton pound. So you can go to the website and have a look. So it's kind of interesting that there is a pushback against speculation in that respect. And my involvement in it was logistically I used to basically do presentations to all the local businesses. The idea was to get the local businesses in Brixton to accept the Brixton pound as a viable currency, as an alternative to the UK pound. So all in all, I think there's about 210 businesses now that are using the Brixton pound. So if you go into Brixton, you can pay with English pounds, or you can pay with Brixton pounds. And a currency, certainly when you talk about local currency, is that one way to, I suppose, to create communities, keep the money in your local community. And one way of doing that is not necessarily restricting, but making sure that the currency is viable within a certain catchment. So if you go to Starbucks, you spend £5 in a Starbucks, £4.50 is going to leave the country because they don't pay tax. Where if you have the Brixton, you spend £5 Brixton pounds in Brixton, that money stays within the local community. So it's really beneficial for your local community in that respect, and it keeps your local community alive. Now, one of the criteria for what we were doing there is that the community by itself had to already have an identity. That's why my friend Josh Ryan Collins, when we were living in Brixton, it worked in Brixton because Brixton has a very particular identity within London anyway. It's a very West Indian, Afro-Caribbean identity as a catchment area. So it kind of worked there. It wouldn't work everywhere in London. It wouldn't work in it won't work off the King's Road. It won't work in certain places in London because they don't have particular identities. I just thought it was kind of interesting when you, Felix, when you proposed something, speculation versus participation. And what I was thinking about is like, well, speculation is kind of when something goes global, and participation when it's something that goes local or stays local. And I think that's part of a bit. And when Nema, you're talking about creating a community, it's like, I suppose it's really hard digitally to create a community. Like, I don't know if I don't do Facebook anymore, but I'm sure you're all kind of on Facebook groups, but it's not really the same thing than getting into a room with a bunch of people. And it's you have these kind of digital communities, but it's very easy to exit and enter, if you know what I mean, where a real community is something else.
There is a possibility as we progress towards a virtual world as something which we inhabit somehow. It's also evidently possible to think about a local environment rather than, something which is out there, as a way of constructing community on the virtual world. Is it about sharing value?
Yeah,
Is it about sharing resources?
I give you an example. I live in a small village in Bordeaux, and we have a local website, like the village website, and it's run by every village. I love it, the French. Every town has a mayor, and it's all very organized and very structured and very kind of community based. And if I get on the website, I can get the local school is connected to that, and I can get into my daughter's report card via the local website of my village. So the Ville de Bassens, I go into it. That's a community in a way. So I think there's a place for creating a digital way, but I think you need that physical connection as well to it. I don't know what it is, but if it just remains on a digital level, I think those connections don't really hold. I don't know what it is,
It needs to be intent. There needs to be intent.
When you talk about value, like I suppose there's a value, when you just mentioned value, and I'm thinking, okay, well, there's a local community value. So that's what keeps us connected, I suppose, if you know what I mean. Example.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of where you find value and identity as opposed to value in...
speculation is always tied to a sort of risk. No, that's what there's always a sort of, there's somebody forfeits an economic gain and somebody else profits from something. There's a cost. No? Getting AI into the mix as well. There's a lot of things which is we're going towards a sort of, relinquishing a sense of control. About Carl J. Friston's free energy agent approach on AI, which is not about reinforcement learning, but it's about how an AI agent can auto-construct a sense of learning through diminishing surprise. So it's almost a sort of paradox here, because we're talking about how AI is becoming more and more intertwined with the financial speculation, the gaining of margins, creating and controlling what the margin is going to be about. But on the other hand, is also tying everything towards a sort of sense of diminishing surprise, so it's like we want that margin, and that margin is going to happen somehow. So we don't want surprises in between. We can generate surprise to generate that margin, but financially things are pretty set. So speculation without surprise somehow, no? That's what I'm saying. So and you've talked, Jena, you've been related to this extraordinary person, David Peat. Not only an extraordinary mind, I'm sure he was an extraordinary human being. I was recently reading his book, Synchronicity, in which he ties Carl Gustav Jung synchronicity to the I Ching and quantum physics. It's just extraordinary the way he kind of, ties reality, thought together through traditional relational understanding of life. And that has led to your film, The Absurdity of Certainty. No? And it's quite an interesting title for today's world. We're talking about speculation right now. We're talking about the absurdity of certainty. How can we control life if it is pretty absurd? if our thoughts can change the matter of reality around us.
It's funny, everything you all have said, including just you, Felix, right now, ties to so many different, you spark so many different touch points in my reality. And just you mentioning surprise reminds me of David Peat, this physicist turned philosopher who Felix mentioned, who used to try to make him laugh. And I was trying to force him into serious conversations. And he would say, why can't you be funny right now? And his answer was because surprise is a requirement of humor, the synaptic jarring. And I would argue too that when we show up to things with certainty, we set the outcome at the outset in a lot of ways. And when we can be open, same synchronicity and artistry and all this beautiful, rich, dynamic life has room to pop in, which to me is why Jung's collective unconscious, synchronicity, and all of these things can tie in together. And reading your description of this discussion reminded me of my brother, for example, is not in finance, but he's really empowered by the Robin Hood-y story of Bitcoin and his participation in this new economy, this new community. It's really exciting for him. And then on the flip side, I sell financial technology, analytics across asset classes, including cryptocurrency. And so I end up in rooms full of people like my brother who have a freedom like attitude around this new economy. And then also bankers I know who are foreign exchange traders whose models work successfully to make money on cryptocurrencies. And I keep trying to warn my brother, like while I'm on Team Revolution, like don't bet 100% against Goldman Sachs. Like hedge a tiny bit just to protect yourself, just for a second, on the powers that be. And they're very different communities, like colliding together on strange, like networking parties here in Miami. It's weird stuff.
Tell us about that. I mean, that's interesting how these things are changing. I mean, Goldman Sachs is definitely now investing in NFTs on a big scale. Of course, they've taken over. It's a market to take over as well. But it's interesting how you say how people, I mean, this mixture of this free, this pure understanding of this democratization of life, of the internet, which is pretty much at the basis, at the root of what the internet was about at the beginning, no? And I think that, Simon, eventually we have some time, I'd like to talk to you about that as well. But tell us, Jena, about what is this gathering? Because that's going to bring a synthesis of something, right?
It's funny. I wonder if we get the third thing above that is somehow greater than the two opposites, which is always, a hopeful thing. But my concern is, they call the cryptocurrency like the triple entry bookkeeping. And in our film, Absurdity of Certainty, we talk about the revolution in thinking with double entry bookkeeping when the West got the zero and was able to say, no, that amount of tomatoes doesn't equal this amount of bread. Like we used to trade in a slightly more egalitarian manner. And then we had double entry bookkeeping, and we sort of abstracted ourselves from the lived commodity of trade. And so triple entry bookkeeping, I don't know what that's going to mean, but it's a revolution. We're in another era. My film is describing a change of the deep past, apparently. I have no idea what becomes of it. My real fear is that wherever we bring like Newtonian clockwork thinking and certainty, as humans, wherever we bring this binomial tree, part of what I call first gear thinking, wherever we bring that, we will reap destruction. And wherever we drop that and bring the totality and the wholeness, we'll reap beautiful, dynamic, co-creation stuff. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful to like the inventor of an airplane that required the use of binary, like clear logical thinking. It's just hard to speak about it without being so sort of abrupt and serious. But I am worried that we don't bring the same open-heartedness that allows for synchronicity into the virtual spaces. If we let the traditional finance world rule what this space is going to be, then the space isn't that interesting.
Yes, there's always this danger of manipulation and the way we're controlling our thoughts. Distributed ledger technology, and again NFTs as well. It's more of a political discussion than a technical discussion right now. It's really not peer-to-peer; it's server-to-server. So there's still control. So, Simon, if it's the right time to go towards you, and there's a little moment there in the train, tell me about this multidisciplinary approach. And going towards the governance side of things, is regulation or deregulation the key? Or is it none of them and something else?
I think first, we have to think about value, and if it's value extraction or value creation. I think this distinction is quite important, right? And when I come back to open source and with my experience first, so it was, decades ago, right? At one point I have to realize that most of the production of open source code was used by, big corporations like Amazon or Google. And I think it's the same with science, the distribution of capital, but they do that in a very expensive way with a very big tax. So for me, that's one of the key, I think, thinking when we look at the project. Do we bring value or we extract value? And in terms of community, for digital community, most of the time it's identity that are kind of imaginary, like with the state, right? We know all that. And but this can still be useful because when you meet someone, then have the same kind of label or understanding of the world. So you even if you are not a real community, you start to share some common, I will not say value, but understanding of the world. And it can be a very quick way to organize at a smaller scale after. And that's what I realized. With open source, we can see open source, for example, as an industrial standard, actually, of working, of seeing the code and things. And when you're hired today in a corporation for coding, or it's like, yeah, it's open source, right? And that's been a lot of way of working, of way of approaching the problem and things like that. Yeah.
Is open source, what you're saying, is it the key to start generating other types of value? A meeting, an encounter, a vision, a group of people, a group of activities, something would happen, something like you were doing, Nema, right now. It's like, what is it creating? It's not a simple thing, creating community. It's not something you do on a click of a finger. Now, I want to create community right now. It's just, there's something which needs to be in the center of the community, shared visions, shared discussion. But so the fact that you're dealing with opening issues, like open source, is somehow leveling an economic aspect of speculation as well, right?
For me, I think opening is a little bit misleading a lot of time. I think it's better to see, and I think it's particularly in blockchain, it's not open, it's free to participate. You have the tools, you can, enter and participate in with the same rules. And it's very close to, free economy with all the problems that bring, concentration of wealth and those kind of things, right? And it's the same with open source, for example. You have a concentration of knowledge, for example, and very high inequality too. When I say about value, I'm not very sure. I think it's more a community of practice, and that's very different. And then you have a lot of politics inside, but people can organize around those practice.
How do we regulate or deregulate certain aspects of, the internet, certain aspects of financial circumstances, technology? Right. So what is your take on that? Just dealing and putting it kind of in this positioning.
I think for me, the regulation or not is the wrong starting point. First, we need to find what is the objective, and that's very political question, right? And what is the objective? And then we need to find, and that's the governance guide and talk. When we know the objective, we can create institution or perhaps some kind of regulation at some point, and also deregulate perhaps some aspect, but with a clear objective and goal. Otherwise it's mostly, I think, a waste of time. Yeah.
In one way, perhaps more towards what you're interested about, Conor. You give classes on surveillance capitalism, like you were saying. If there's no cost, you're the product, and introducing all these elements. Nick Bostrom's paperclip paradox with AI. You're telling an AI agent to make as many paperclips as it can, and then it keeps going until it dissolves all matter into paperclips, including switching off the button that says this is the limit. How do we reach a sense of consensus with AI? We haven't been able to reach a sense of consensus in humanity on what is right or wrong, and how do we deal with each other? What happens when speculation also affects what we put into our bodies? Fisheries in the northern seas and near you, Conor, they're being depleted because there needs to be a margin. Food industry as well, even if it's toxic, we're in the midst also of natural toxification as well, as we go into this relationship with technology, which evidently needs also to be a part of the solution.
My interest is that I run a business ethics course in one of the schools I teach in. We do a whole module on surveillance capitalism and AI and the implications, and it's kind of interesting what people are saying is that how do we change that? You just have to, how do these companies make money? How does Facebook make money? It's all surveillance capitalism. It's basically they're garnering all this data about you and selling it to advertisers. That's how they're making money. That's how Google makes money. So yes, you are the product. for every person is 10 to 15,000 pieces of data available already on you, whether you use it or not. What I find interesting is that I think the way to change is that's their business model, is you have to force them to change their business model. Professor Shoshana Zuboff, she wrote a book and she called it Surveillance Capitalism. And I think she coined the phrase, in fact. And she's a Harvard professor of psychology. She's emeritus professor in Harvard in the law school and also the business school. But she says, like, it doesn't have to be this way. I mean, it's just their business model. So it's not about the extraction of data, because it was in 2003 that Google started making money. And it's because they adapted this business model of extraction. If you think about environmental legislation, how do you get General Motors to drive safer cars? You have to put a law in saying you must put seatbelts in your cars. Like, you have to force them to do it, otherwise they won't do it.
But who's legislating? And that's the thing. Who's presenting?
Well, in the global market, it's hard to like. If you look at tax law, it's hard to legislate. It's hard to legislate because one country, if they operate in one country and there's no legislation there, and then the other country.
That's what, Simon, you were just writing on the chat. The market doesn't allow you to change the market somehow, no? But
Right.
then again, is this community NFTs, back to Nema and back to all these issues? I mean, NFTs, creating community, creating a sense of vision together, creating a sense of sharing of something, real life, not only pixels, but also encounters, like, giving value and approaching things in a more open way, even if open, again, Simon, what you were saying is not the actual the best way of describing it. Somehow this possibility of generating all these issues through the instrumentation of digital worlds is shifting also the way we deal with institutions, the way we deal with, somehow, like you were saying, Conor, corporations. There's a number of all these micro environments that are adding a different sense of value. That's what you were saying, Jena, about your brother being on this kind of like revolutionary stance through a way of seeing the world, a way of sharing the world, a way of understanding the world. I mean, speculation needs to participate as well in the equation, right? Because it is there. This is what's driving the machine somehow.
The way I see speculation, I mean, I don't see it. I mean, usually speculation is seen as an only bad word, but speculation also gives liquidity to the market, if you want, because people are risking and trying to kind of find profit. The connection between speculation and participation, I always thought that the common denominator might be trade. And I think that with trade, you are at the same time building community. I mean, generally, you're trying to forecast in advance. But one thing I wanted to add on what Conor was saying is that it's true that in Web 2, so like in Facebook, Google, Amazon, that type of business models, those corporations own the model. And what is happening now with this NFT crypto revolution, it looks like, is that we are going to the Web 3 era where you actually can own the product. So in the creator economy, where people are like on Twitter simply tweeting thoughts, or on Instagram posting some pictures, in the Web3 world, I mean, you can also own the product. It's a better way of self-regulating the market.
Bringing things from the chat, which we need to be uncorruptible, right?
What this conversation reminded me of was in the United States at one point, when they implemented the Volcker Rule to stop people from trading with, our grandmother's money, speculating with money that was meant to be secure there. They implemented something called the Volcker Rule. And so you weren't allowed to prop trade at certain institutions. And I would go up and visit banks like these big organizations that were mentioned earlier. And I walked in and I see people I know trading. And they're not supposed to be. And I'm like, I don't understand what's going on here. And they're sitting in a New York trading desk and they're like, oh yeah, no, I now work for the UK entity. So that's what came to mind with the regulating. Yeah, regulating morality won't work, but maybe financially motivating morality somehow could work. I don't know how you could change someone's business model. They will self-regulate if they're not financially rewarded for disadvantageous behavior. But if they're making money being bad guys, they're going to be bad guys.
And the only way to change a business model is perhaps changing the business.
We're changing the consumer, right? If the money isn't going into these rewarding this behavior, organic products are not going to be as expensive when all of us are buying them.
Patterns of thought are changing. The world we see is also shifting around us. All these issues, we're changing. Things are happening nevertheless. So perhaps money somehow is not really being representative of actual physical values anymore. The mirror has broken somehow.
That's funny. You're sparking for me a conversation my brother and I had. So he's been trying to convince people to, like older people who have no relationship to cryptocurrency, to get their money out of US dollars and into crypto. And so he's been fielding a series of objections and getting people converted. And I was like, here's an objection for you that I just heard from an old woman that I'm friends with. And she said, what if there's no electricity? And how is this going to work for me? The only thing we could come up with to counter it is, in a world with no electricity, where we don't anticipate it coming back anytime soon, only real things of value have value, and your currency, your traditional currency, also doesn't have value, because unless you had a mattress full of money, you're still digitally locked away from traditional currency.
Community automatically happens. You share resources, physical resources, which we've had a bit of that over the last couple of years, going through this very liminal time through pandemic, when we started realizing, okay, so then perhaps things are not the way we think about them right now. What is this reality that we're dealing with? What's the ideal scenario? We have the possibility of creating instruments, moving from the social environment, attention harvesting, to instruments that we can use only when we need to, and then relate to physical and creativity.
One thing I think blockchain really changed. We speak a lot in our society about individual responsibility, and I think we should develop the idea of collective responsibility. I don't really know what that means, but I think we should think about it. And I think the individual then role is to foster this collective responsibility. And I think blockchain project when you have those communities that take on a project with capital, their own capital, perhaps it's some kind of new model of some kind of collective responsibility, a new way of looking at solving the problem.
So is anybody, Kevin or Eliane, ideas? You can also talk about yourself a little bit so people that don't know you have an idea of where you're coming from.
The interesting issue that I was listening, I'm very into, is this all this community building. I'm a very good friend of Felix. I know Nema very well. I'm involved in projects with both of them. So it's really interesting for me, because for what's happening for me right now is like I'm involved digitally with these people, because Felix is living far away and Nema too. And on the other side, it reflects very strongly my daily life, So, and I think the community building is really something that's happening right now. We take our time to share, to meet, or with Conor. Now I see Conor the second time, So I think even if it's not local, it can become local, even if it's digital. But it has to have probably a repetition, repetition. You have to meet, you have to take your time. So I think, it's an interesting time for me where these kind of things are merging, kind of real relationship, with kind of digital relationship. But I think the key probably is for especially community building is really, it's a mixture, I even met, Jena, we met, we worked together. And so I see that with time, that's probably how you create your little, or we are that kind of generation where the local and the global community kind of merges, or at least where it makes sense for me, it doesn't make really sense for me to be on social media with thousands of people that I don't really know, or I don't really connect. I prefer to be on, so I'm experiencing this kind of community, like from real and digital, and I'm a real local guy, and I'm documentary making. Last 4 films I've made was everything did in one square kilometer from my house. So, and also there it's local, but it's global anyway. So
I think that's a trend that's happening.
Merging.
People are realizing that perhaps smaller and closer is better than larger and nonsense somehow, relating to each other.
Yeah, so it's just kind of what Jena was saying about, when we talked about changing the business model, legislation is one way to go about it. And then Simon was talking about, corruption. How do you get politicians to do, what it's in everybody's interest? And that's really difficult. And maybe it is about customer choice. Customers decide not to, like what you just said about Facebook. People are just not going on Facebook anymore because social media it started with Facebook as a kind of a catch-all, and now it's becoming fragmented. It's like music. Like back in the 60s, everyone was listening to the same music. And now it's like, you can be in a speed metal vibe and that's a community, or you could be in a techno house vibe and that's a community, and you don't even touch any of the other types of music. And I think social media is going that way, where people are picking and choosing their social media. What Jen also mentioned about organic food, maybe we buy organic food because we don't want the chemicals and the asbestos or whatever else, and the glyphosates that Monsanto put in the herb killer. So we don't want that anymore. So that might be the driver. Maybe we can't wait for legislation. Maybe it is a bottom up, and we just have to make informed choices.
Even if, we're talking about real life encounters, we're talking about a virtual encounter right now. How does a meeting of a certain kind generate value and is allowed to perpetuate on the virtual landscape, generating value? Pretty much what NFTs want to do, right? Whereas there's a sort of sharing value which is distributed through a certain amount of servers. But what happens if we take that not as through art, digital art, pixel, but something which is intangible?
It's kind of difficult to answer this one, to be honest. But maybe to reattach to before, you were mentioning about how money is important. What I found interesting is that the change that is happening in the crypto world looks like more bottom up, where reputation is more important than the money that you have, or let's say the value in crypto that you have. It's interesting to see how it develops, because the people, the community, which are trying to build on top of Web3, they're trying to move away from the centralization of power. Therefore, the Facebooks, the Twitters, which are bringing the whole content or the whole value from the users, and give back the value to the owners.
We're talking about proprietorship here always, no? So it's what about leaving proprietorship somehow to the rest? I think I want to read what Simon wrote on the chat. We have to change not only direction, top down versus down top, but change dimensions in which we understand value production, or how we explain the relation between different group of type of participants, customers, corporations, states. Obviously, both approaches are not mutually exclusive. We're talking about changing dimensions there, no? It's not about changing directions. There's a clue there. I think we're kind of somehow reaching a point in which we're saying, okay, because we have and we live in multiple dimensions right now. There is a sense that we relate to the psychic aspects of reality, the physical, the body of nature, the body of the world, the virtual, and other possible dimensions that we share and we call reality as a whole, our imagination. We were talking about this in our last session. What is reality? I mean, our imagination is reality. If thought can change matter, the smallest level of existence, the Planck constant, whatever it is, what is reality? How do we relate to that? And how do we change dimensions? And how do we change the way we live?
I think otherwise we go in circle. Okay, and science do that a lot. Actually, when you have a new field in science, it's exactly that, a new lens, right? You have sociology, and then you look at the world very differently, the same question, right? And I think we have to do that for more broadly in the productive area, or we see, and I come back to the value. I think it's a good starting point, the value, but also how we see production in our life, what it means. For example, I was participating in a lot, I did Wikipedia as a something I do in my life, jobs like recreation things. But because I do that, then I got money. from outside, because I understand, community better. I understand open license and things. But then for me, editing Wikipedia is my real job, or participating to open source project or community. This is real productivity with a very high level scale, but I don't get money out of it, right? So sometimes I'm like, what is my job, right? And I think that is a very good question to have. What is the job? What is the customer? And not only what it is, but perhaps just forget about customer, right?
So I don't have an answer, but I'm also intrigued by this. I'm hearing the physicists Basil Hiley and David Bohm, who brought me into this film that I'm working on, that they didn't want a new theory. They wanted a new ontology. So they wanted a new way to connect the existing theories, so to shift the gear in sort of a more umbrella way. So I feel like that relates a little bit to maybe what you're communicating, Simon.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's the kind of idea.
Eliane.
About the change of dimension, for example, I think we already did a change of dimension in the past when we moved from exchanging physical objects to inventing money as a store of value. But also inventing money took a lot of time. I mean, the money we know now is not. It was not an invention of like a day. It's an accumulation of inventions related to this concept, and a change in dimension. I think it could come from this a similar idea or a parallel idea, an evolution of value. The thing that is always intriguing me with all these discussions, whether about cryptocurrency or NFT, is that we are the real value is still money in all these discussions. They are always tied to a money value. We're always speaking about Bitcoin as $30,000. The next question which comes from this is, okay, we want to think about value in another way. How do we untie it from the concept of money? Now, the whole discussion was very interesting, but then your final question, Felix, really, I wouldn't say killed it, but it's your question was about how can we generate economical value from encounters. So the question ties it back to economical value, and economical value today is money. So my question is it important to invent a new store of value, or is it important to be able to reduce what we create, or the new objects, the inventions we create? How can we bring them back to the value of money? Should we instead find creative ways to still use money as an easy, collective, understandable way, not to depend on it, but to use it as a way to communicate the importance of what we're doing?
I don't have an answer, but I am triggered by something David Pete was teaching me about the joining of time and money. When you talk about decoupling value and money, you just triggered for me how the evolution of the Western worldview, double entry bookkeeping, clocks, maps, timekeeping. The train is we had to get time zones in so that our train schedules would make sense. Instead of noon being straight overhead, the sun, it had to be this arbitrary abstract concept. And all this stuff sort of like percoled up around the same time. And somehow this is how we got the idea that time and money are like inextricably linked, which they're certainly not, just as value and money are not. Well, maybe they are linked in some pure way, but not in our manifestation of it, I guess.
We start trying to generate a sort of security for the future. It's always tied to this sense of time, right? Value, what's going to happen. And this is going back to predictability versus interpretability, which is pretty much the AI cycles today. And how does this possibility of diminishing surprise relate today with speculation, which is about taking risks? No? So it's always about this kind of feeling of, we're in this cycle, it's generating, accumulating. If we stop seeing this sense of accumulation, for example, and we start seeing that resources are not infinite, and that perhaps the sharing of value through health and the development of consciousness, the development of relationships, the development of other types of understanding might also somehow relate to a new way of talking about money.
The combination of time, money, and the talk about a dimension where we are slowly moving into the metaverse. I mean, many of the let's say social media are going there, and Meta is Facebook. The metaverse per se is simply how much time you spend in the digital world. I mean, we are, in my opinion, now in this room, we are in a metaverse.
Certainly in the paradigm, the world we live in, where we all have to pay bills and we all have to find, we have places to live and all these kind of things. It's very hard to find. Like I do a lot of meditation, and I find in terms of value, when you talk about value, there's the intra-value and then there's the interpersonal value. So if you're looking outwardly, it's kind of the value of money and community, and the introvert would be the value of your experience. So for me, but in the world we live in, it's very hard to make that distinct, to separate value from financial value or money or whatever other medium of exchange we need to. And every society throughout history has traded, so we all need to trade in some way. Trade needs some form of exchange, and exchange now is the standard is currencies. And then Felix, you talk about contracts. I think that's kind of an interesting one as well. Like there's a social contract as well that people have. There's a community contract that people have, and I think that's worth exploring in terms of value as well. I don't know where it leads, but it's just something that's stuck in my head.
East and West, they do meet somehow through the virtual world, and as much as East is East and West is West, throughout the next decade or so, with technology and the way technology relates with physical reality, new ways of creating value, new ways of sharing resources, new ways of constructing currency as well, will come about. So it's interesting to see how that can be instrumented. And how, again, participation and speculation, both on their own right, merge to a healthy environment, not abuse somehow, no? Corruption driven.
The West, my film is focused on the Western worldview, and the deeper I went into these limitations and these sort of problems and constrictions that we are living by, I realized a lot of this is uniquely a Western problem. The experience of being a part of a whole, as opposed to a cog in a machine, is, a uniquely Western problem. I don't mean to be exclusive of all other cultures, but to say that we are specifically the ones holding that the world is out there, that it's a machine we can go in and fix little cogs of. And, perhaps if the West could get out of the way or return to how we saw ourselves as participants in a living world before the 1700s, or if we could evolve beyond the limitations of Newtonian clockwork, or we could just get the hell out of the way and return the metaverse to the indigenous peoples around the world and let those still extant rules govern how we behave, then we won't have any of this moral quandary.
Daniel Schmachtenberger, recently saw an interview of him on Joe Rogan, talking about how we live in Paleolithic emotions and instincts, medieval institutions and godlike technology without the love, prudence, and wisdom of the gods, right? So there's certainly something we were looking for in the way we are relating now with shamanistic experiences, with root-like environments, with different ways of dealing with reality and understanding the depth of things. The intangible is also a quality that we share. We're certainly jumping into new, perhaps cognitive environments and horizons as humanity.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for gathering us, Felix.
Thank you. And hopefully we'll have some more time sometime soon. And good luck, Nema, with your NFT. Send us information. Let us know how it goes. Huh?
Yeah.
And, we'll dive more into these waters soon, I hope. Lots of love to you all. Take care.